Good morning. My name is Sarisha Gunta. I'm an attorney with Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. Thank you for joining us for this installment of our monthly webcast series. Today, we're excited to have Larry Kunin with us to speak about the mobile workforce, considerations for employees using personal devices for work. But first, before he starts, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. Our mission is to provide free legal assistance to community-based nonprofits that serve low-income or disadvantaged individuals. And we do this by matching eligible nonprofit organizations with volunteer lawyers from the leading corporations and law firms in Atlanta. To give you a little bit more background on who our clients are, they're 501c3 organizations that are located or serving populations in Metro of Atlanta, low-income and disadvantaged individuals who are in nonprofits or otherwise unable to afford legal services. If you're interested in becoming a client or getting more information about our organization, please visit our website. And also on our website, we have past webcasts and a list of upcoming workshops and webcasts. And now just a little legal disclaimer. Please keep in mind that today's information is just general guidance. It is not specific for your organization. If you have specific questions about your nonprofit, please reach out to your attorney. And today's information is copyrighted by Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta and Morris Manning. And now I'm excited to pass the mic over to Larry Kunin, who's a partner in the litigation department of Morris Manning, and he's also the chair of their technology and IP litigation practice. Larry?
Good morning, everyone. Doing a webcast is something I've done a few times before. It's of course a little different than some presentations because I can't see if everybody out there is looking happy or frustrated or sad, or etc. But I know you have the ability to ask questions, and I do invite questions as we move along because this is a presentation that's really about you and your interests. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Just give you a little bit of my background. Before I was a lawyer, when I've been a lawyer about 25 years, I was in the IT industry. I was computer science educated. I practiced in IT for many years, and so it was an aptitude that carried in with me through law and has given me opportunities to speak to folks like you today about technology subjects, and today's subject is BYOD, or bring your own device. So the first thing I'd like to cover this morning is what is a bring your own device. Some are obvious and some people don't really think about. I would say that the first devices that people called a BYOD device were when iPads first came out, because they were kind of a combination of a communication tool and a computer, and you could bring them to work and you could check your email and you can check websites and you could even look at documents. I don't know if originally people thought about cell phones as bring your own device because original cell phones were something you spoke on. That's obviously different today. Today, cell phones can do just about anything a computer can do. I know that me as a lawyer, and you're going to see me hold this up quite a few times today, I have gigabytes of attorney-client privilege documents on this device right here, and I am the title owner of this device, not my law firm. And that in and of itself raises concerns regarding data security, attorney-client confidentiality, and they are protected, and we'll go through how they're protected later and maybe give some ideas to you as well. Other bring your own devices are personal computers, especially in smaller companies and especially with charitable companies. It is a cost savings if an employee or an agent can use their own computer rather than using a computer that is purchased by and issued by the company. There's a little bit of loss of control when that happens because the company doesn't actually control exactly what goes on the computer, exactly what comes off the computer, and the computer is almost certainly going to be used for a dual purpose, meaning business and personal. And we're going to talk about that distinction as well. Another thing people don't think about, flash drives. A lot of us have walked around with those little flash drives to transfer documents without having to go out to the cloud, which is yet another subject we'll talk about. And flash drives present their own problem with regard to security of company information. I'm going to pause on that one real quick, even though we're going to touch on some cons later. Let me give you a couple examples. One, flash drives can carry with them viruses or other kinds of malware that people are not aware of. So it generally helps to use flash drives that are either issued by the company or have been recently formatted, but not something that's been plugged in and used on a regular basis, because you don't know what's on it. Second thing is, when an employee leaves a company, one of the most common problems we face as lawyers, and it's because it's when our phone rings, not that it's a commonplace every time an employee leaves a company, because we don't get a phone call when somebody leaves and everything's good and nothing happens. We only get a phone call when something goes bad. Employees sometimes will take information with them. If they are using their own personal computer, they're just going to take the personal computer and walk away. But what if they want to otherwise preserve information or take information from somebody else's computer in the business? They could plug in a flash drive, download information, and the computer will actually track that there was a flash drive plugged in at a particular time, and sometimes even give you information like the brand, the serial number, may not tell you exactly what was downloaded. But it is a concern because it is a bring your own device that anybody can walk into any space with one of those little things sticking in their pocket. I have also on the PowerPoint use of personal email for business and use of personal social media for business, and then personal cloud storage. These are not really devices per se, but I wanted to throw them out here for this reason. It is still the uses of a technology that's really for a personal purpose, for a business purpose, or vice versa. Let me tell you one problem with the mixture of personal email and business email. Business email, so if you're working for a company and you've got a domain address that says, for me, L. Cunin at MMM Law, I work for MMM Law. If I were to conduct personal business with a personal lawyer on that domain, I waive the attorney-client privilege. Well, your companies could waive things like confidentiality, trade secrets, disclosure of other confidential information. If you are in healthcare services, you may have HIPAA issues. It is very important to keep your communications separate. Personal email, using personal email addresses from business, using business emails for business. And then your social media, your personal social media accounts is not something to conduct business on. And I can tell you that one of the things I do as a lawyer, if I have to take the deposition or otherwise examine a witness, first thing I do is I jump on social media and I see what they've been saying, and there's a chance they're talking about even my own lawsuit. And so you never know. And then personal cloud storage, and I should have said personal or business cloud storage. Let me give you this example. I have a BYOD device that I use for traveling. It's a Microsoft Surface. I can get into my firm's email. I have to go through certain security protocols to get to it. But I use that device when I travel, and it's because it's light, it's easy, and I can do my personal work and I can do my business work on it. It has Office 365, that is my personal Office 365, and I can store documents up on the cloud. I never, ever, ever store business documents up on the cloud in that computer. I keep them 100% separate and therefore secure, and I only load them into our firm's document management system, which is also secure and keeps the information separate. And this way, if anyone ever gets access to my personal cloud, or if I leave the firm, the client confidences remain client confidences. So let's go to the next slide. Primary benefits of BYOD, because you're going to hear a lot of downside to it. So the question is always, well, why would I allow it anyway? Well, one, it's very hard to stop. But the number one thing is convenience. It's very easy for me to have my personal phone, one phone. The company doesn't have to pay, to get another phone. It's easy to set up. Same thing with an iPad or a personal computer. Next is cost to the employer, including maintenance and upgrades. It is absolutely a cost saving to the employer to allow BYOD devices. Productivity, also, by the way, there are several studies out there that say that productivity is significantly higher using your own devices than it is company devices. The reason the productivity is higher is because you're more familiar with your own device that you've set up, that's got the software you loaded onto it, rather than using a template that a company has put up for you that everybody shares the same thing when people have different ways of operating. Employee freedom. is another good thing. People can work from home, they can work on the road, again, without loading up with multiple laptops, multiple devices, cell phones. Accessibility, even if you don't have a laptop, a lot of people have desktops at home. That's technically a type of BYOD device if you're using that device to log into Office email from your home computer, and so it makes it more accessible. And then I've already mentioned the familiarity with your own technology leads to efficiency, and efficiency is a big thing. So there are definitely benefits to BYOD, and I am actually not aware of very many companies that do not allow employees to use anything of their own technology, and even if you did have such a policy, it's kind of hard to police it 100%. What are the cons? Control. Again, here is an iPhone. It's got client confidences on it. I email clients on it. The law firm and the clients don't control where I go with this phone. They don't control if I get an email, if I were to forward it somewhere outside of my system. That's kind of hard to stop. I could get a document from a client. It could even be an encrypted document, and when I get it and I unencrypt it, do I send it, print it, etc., from a place where nobody's watching me because I can access it remotely. Data security is a huge problem. Every device is subject to some kind of hack, theft, etc. There are countermeasures, of course, antivirus programs. There are passwords that are now required by just about every smartphone I'm aware of. I remember when passwords were not required on smartphones. They are now. Some of them use biometrics. This happens to be an iPhone 10. It logs on by looking at my face. So that's kind of hard to copy unless I had a twin, which I don't. There are newer devices that are coming out that are actually going to use retinal scans, which if you're familiar with Clear at the airport, they're already using retinal scans. Even twins can copy that. So there are countermeasures, but security is probably the big thing because depending on what kind of business you're in, again, you might be in possession of personal information, healthcare information, financial information, confidential information, trade secret information. You certainly want to protect all of that information as much as you can, and we'll talk a little bit about what some of those measures are. And I've already talked about the waiver of privilege, waiver of confidentiality, loss of trade secrets. Just to touch on that, if you happen to be dealing with a trade secret, the most important word in that sentence is secret. So if it's not a secret, you don't have a trade secret. If there's an inadvertent loss of the secret or a hack or something unlawful, you don't waive the trade secret. But if it's because you were very, very lax in your security, and that's why it got out there, and you didn't take measures, because that's in the statute. You have to take measures that are reasonable under the circumstances to protect the secrecy of the trade secret. If you haven't taken those steps by just allowing people to be running around with their own devices completely unsecure, emailing things around with absolutely no policies, that's where the waiver could come in. And then data preservation. This is really a litigation concept. If by chance you get involved in litigation, whether you're going to file it, whether you've been sued, whether you're a third party who's on notice that you may have information relevant to a piece of litigation, what kicks in is called a litigation hold. And I've actually seen this happen where somebody or a company was under a litigation hold, everybody knew about the litigation hold, and somebody resigned and, not thinking about it, walked out the door with their device and then deleted everything from their email, notwithstanding the litigation hold, just thinking with good intent, I'm leaving the company, I want to make sure I protect everything. And then lo and behold, there was destruction of evidence. In that particular instance, it was all okay. We had a backup of the email system. We were able to recover it. But we have sophisticated systems, and not every company, especially smaller companies, have such sophisticated systems. So there is that issue of making sure that things are preserved if people are walking around with their own laptops and they leave. So next slide. Let's talk about some best practices. Text messaging. Text messaging as a lawyer makes me cringe. Do I text message? Yes. With my friends, with my family, with my daughter when you're coming home. Things like that. Never, ever, ever for business. It's hard to control. It's hard to recover if it's lost. It's hard to retain if by chance a text message forms a contract. Somebody texts you, here's an offer, and I text back an acceptance of that offer. I now have a contract. That if that text message is not printed out or otherwise preserved or stored in some hard drive somewhere, it may be hard to ultimately prove that up. People also talk in text messages like they're talking to people. Text messages are not substitutes necessarily for our a conversation if there's a written record of them, and sometimes in litigation we'll get a hold of them. So we try to say you should have a policy that says text messaging is not to be used in business, and when we do litigation holds, we have to ask the client to make sure that if anybody has done any business in text message, they got to save those text messages, and we better get them sooner than later. We have seen this done through LinkedIn messaging as well. I consider that a form of text messaging. If you use Facebook messaging, that's a type of instant messaging. Try to use business email for business, period. Text messaging is just it's just wrought with danger. I already mentioned plugging USB devices that are unknown, at least without a security scan, into your own computer. So if you're using a computer and somebody gives you a device and says, here's something for your business, don't blindly plug it into your computer because you don't know what is going to be coming in. And it may not even be their intent. They may not know that they've got an infected hard drive. Public networks. All right, we've all been in Starbucks. We've all been in the lobby of a Hilton. We've all been in even law firms like I'm sitting in now that have public networks. I sometimes feel like it's a little bit overstated to say you can't use public networks in order to conduct business. It's a matter of fact. It's how people do business, but be mindful of exactly what is it that you might be transmitting. So if I'm going to be transmitting in an email to a client a confidential document, I may want to encrypt that document. And you can encrypt a Word document pretty easy, or a PDF document. I just try to be mindful of whether the network I'm on is secure. My home network is secure, but the network at Starbucks probably is not secure, and you don't know who's sitting around. Be mindful of it. Use tight password controls. We faced an issue where people were walking around, and I'm not going to mention the industry or what kind of business it was or what kind of computer system it was, but there was a service company and people had their own laptops to do software maintenance on client systems. And they used a third-party login system. It kind of like a password locker, but it wasn't really a password locker. And it turned out that everyone was using the same username and the same very easily guessed password. Well, some bad guy figured that out and then was able to log into somebody's system, and there was a hack, and luckily that client system had all the security protocols to have the alarms go off and say something's going on here, and then we did an investigation and found out this is what happened. Well, if people are using their own laptops, you should have a policy that everybody has their own username for the email system. If there's access to cloud storage, whether it's Amazon Web Services, Google Docs, they should have their own username and different password. My firm, and this gets a little more sophisticated, but we require people to change their passwords every month. And it cannot be a password that's used in the past. And if you don't change the password within a month, and we get a warning, your password expires in 7 days, your password expires in 6 days, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then you wake up one day and you are cut off. I can't get into my email, I can't get into documents, I can't log into our system, I can't do anything. I got to pick up the phone and call IT and go, I didn't reset my password, and so then they set me up with a temporary password, and then I log in, and then I have to reset my password immediately, because that temporary password will only be good for a while. And then phishing exposure and testing.
Question about
sure.
passwords.
Mm-hmm.
What about for phones, for smartphones? Do you have any suggestions for what kind of recommendations or even requirements should be in place? Because you can use, some people don't have any password or any, you just swipe and can get into work email.
Okay, so there's a few different issues with regard to cell phones, protection of cell phones. As I mentioned earlier, passwords used to be voluntary. And cell phones, and now they're mandatory. At least I haven't seen a Droid or iPhone device recently that does not have password controls, but your policy should require that there be a password to get into the phone. Once you're in the phone, and by the way, iPhone moved from, it used to be a 4-digit number to get into the phone. Now it's a 6-digit number to get into the phone, or alternatively, you can do a swipe, a thumbprint. Nobody can copy your thumbprint, unless they knock you out and hold your hand up like in the movies where you see people do that. Facial recognition on the most recent phones, but you could use any of those in order to log in. That gets you into the phone. Then the question is, now how can you get into certain documents and email? Well, there still could be a second level of protection. So within my firm, if we exchange documents, those documents are locked. And so once I'm inside my phone, if I want to go to a document, I still need to know the password for the document to be able to open up the document. For my work email, and I do want to talk about this, there are programs out there that will not allow people to log into work email through their phone unless they've gone through an authentication process. Ours is kind of sophisticated, again, because of our size. We use something that's locked into our Exchange server, but I know there are apps out there for cloud devices as well, that before you're allowed access, you have to download an app. Then whoever's controlling the access, somebody in your company is going to be controlling the access. It doesn't necessarily have to be IT, but if somebody hires an employee and assigns a username, before they can use that, they have to go through an authentication level through the phone in order to get it. And then if they leave the company will normally have the ability to terminate that access and actually wipe the phone. I can tell you that if I left my firm or if I lost this phone, my firm can be called and they can actually wipe my email off of this phone without my even knowing about it. Well, I'll know about it when I go to look for it and it's not there. But regardless of the size of your company, there are products out there that will give this second factor authentication once you have logged into your phone, a higher level of authentication and verification in order to enable you to get access to your documents. One BYOD issue we did face, and this involved a mixture of phone usage and a laptop. Employee left. It was actually 2 employees, and overnight their access was not cut off because they were the ones who happened to be controlling the access to, I think it was an Amazon Web Services account, and they didn't turn over the credentials for it, and overnight they used both devices in order to download information from the company onto their phones. Customer names, there was technology that was downloaded, and then they turned over the credentials and their access was cut off, but they'd already downloaded everything. Well, there are logs that are kept on the cloud services as to who's logging in, when, and what are they doing, and we actually got a log that showed everything they downloaded to say that they caved very quickly when we presented them with that information. We got a hold of their devices, we got them wiped by an expert. So I kind of rambled on, from that question, but we are somewhat limited getting in a phone to what the hardware manufacturer is going to provide to us. And again, it's as easy on an iPhone as a 6-digit number, and if it's an older iPhone, it may be a 4-digit number. Although even older iPhones generally are updated, the software is updated. And so you have to think about the second level of protection. I put in here this thing about phishing. This really isn't a BYOD thing, because it applies to any device, whether it's a BYOD device or a work device. I just like to always throw out a reminder to people for data security. Watch out for those emails that come into your system that look real. They get by your spam blockers, they get by your virus checkers, and they're phishing emails, and they look like they came from FedEx, they look like they came from American Express, and they ask you to click on a link. Those emails themselves don't cause a problem. It's when you click on the link or open the attachment. And employee education and reminding the employees is a way to deal with that. One thing we do for education is we actually send out fake phishing emails to our employees. And then we measure how many people are actually clicking on them. And we know when they click on them, and then they get a call from IT who says, guess what, this was a phishing email. and here were the signs you should have looked for. And obviously, since fake phishing email, nothing bad happened. But our compliance rates are extraordinarily high since we put this program in place, because sometimes people will still just not thinking, and they're sending out FedExes all the time, and they get an email that looks exactly like it. Just be aware of that. More best practices, and some of these we covered, including through the last question.
I have one more question about the password theme. So an employer can require a password on a personal device, not just on the email, but onto that device itself?
But that would be by policy. So if you've got a cell phone that allows you to just turn it on, like you said, with a swipe, and it doesn't have, not with a thumbprint, but just any person could walk up to it, the policy could say you need to have a password before you get into your phone. But unless you're looking over the person's shoulder to set it up and looking over their shoulder to prevent them from turning it off, you're really relying on the policy coming in play. So, the modern devices, again, that I've seen, I can't turn it off. I know that I can't turn off my access on this phone. I mean, my password. It requires me to have a password. There's no way for me to turn it off.
Mine I can just swipe.
Can you? Okay. Do you have a Droid device?
I have an Android, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not as familiar with the Android technology, other than I do know it is a little bit more data insecure. Just one example, an expert witness told me this during a seminar last year. Approximately 10% of the antivirus programs for a Droid were themselves virus programs. So you got to do your research also on what antivirus you're pulling down. It's from McAfee, it's probably valid. If it's from Joe's antivirus, you may want to double check it. But yeah, if you can get onto your phone without a password, there should be a policy that you have it, because you don't want to leave it, in a bus station and in an airport, in a restaurant, in a Starbucks, and somebody can pick it up and swipe. And then if you don't have that second layer inside on your documents or emails, then they can grab that, they can forward it to themselves. There's a lot of information that they can get from it. So it is always a best practice to have that password. And then I'm not sure it's as critical for the phone to have a policy that you have to change the password every so often. Because ours, it just means I can't get into my network. So even though I don't change my cell phone password as frequently, I do change it, but not as frequently, I still can't get into my work email unless I've updated that password. So best practices, I've already mentioned, don't mix work and personal email. Consider researching software that can be installed on cell phones, iPads. Bring your own Microsoft Surface, which is not an iPad. It'll be a Microsoft platform. But what software is out there, and in my experience is you can get it fairly cheap, especially if you're a charitable entity. Educational entities can sometimes get them for free. I have 2 kids who are in institutions of higher learning, and they get almost all their software for free that does all this stuff. So you can definitely talk to various vendors about that, and starting right off with Google, Amazon, VMware. They've got these programs. Restrict access to documents. What does that mean? Okay, so let's say you have a Google Docs account. There are normally ways to limit who can get access to what directories and give rights to those directories, and so more critical information will be put in documents that have limited access to. Social media, I've mentioned, it's just broad with problems, and just try not to do anything business on social media, period. And then photos. Why did I put this here? Well, the most common thing that we see with regard to departing employees when they log on to either your network or they log into your cloud system and they download information is because they have mixed personal information with business information and stored it out there. And for convenience purposes, rather than picking and choosing, I'm going to download my resume, I'm going to download these photos, I'm going to download this tax return that I've uploaded so I could get it to my accountant. It's just easier for me to block everything and download everything, and guess what happened? I just downloaded all the company information at the same time. It goes back to try not to mix where you're storing your photos versus where you're storing business information, and again, that's really more policy. My system is not going to prevent me from storing a photo, a personal photo. And by the way, most of our devices these days have cameras on them, and you take the photo and it's right there on the camera, and then you could forward it by email, etc. immediately. So just be cognizant of that. Looks like we're really close out of time, so I just want to cover this last two things really quick. I'm not going to cover it bullet point by bullet point, but employee departure. You need to think about preserving their communications. Where is the company information when they leave? What you want to really make sure of is if they're using their own laptop, that they don't have company documents on their laptop, which you should expect if they've got their own device. But you want to make sure that you've got the company information so that you have actually asked the employee, do we have all of the company information off your laptop, and maybe even ask for permission as part of your BYOD policy. When you depart the company, we will be allowed access to your personal computer for purposes of obtaining company documents. Your private documents will remain private and will not be obtained by us, so you protect their personal information. And
just FYI, we actually have time. So,
we have a little bit, okay.
Yeah, we
Good.
have a question similarly. What about cell phones? Can you require the employee to hand over their personal smartphone so that the company can verify that they've removed email access?
Yes, so there's two considerations there. So one is by policy, when somebody comes on board, you will be allowed to use a personal smartphone, or whatever we're calling them now. We used to call them PDAs and they became smartphones. It will allow you to use that upon departure from the company. We will be allowed access to confirm that you have deleted the email account, as well as confirm that any company documents have also been deleted from the email, because there's going to be document storage apps that are on here, whether it's iPhone storage, or iCloud, I mean. iCloud storage, Google has storage, Microsoft has storage, and you can see all those accounts. Mine, there's a files icon, and it immediately pulls up each of those accounts. Hopefully the employee has kept their documents separate, which makes it easy. The sensitivity from the employee is going to be your access to personal documents, which is why you make this part of the policy. And by the way, when I say put these in policies, not a policy that you dump in front of the employee with 10 other documents on the first day of work that just says sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. I mean, actually go over the policy with them. But really highlight what are going to be some of the things that are going to occur in the future, so that the employee doesn't just not realize that there was a policy about what they do with their information. The second thing is these apps that I mentioned with regard to destruction. If I were to depart my firm, again, they will log into my Exchange account and they will delete it, which will delete it from my phone at the same time, because the only way I get into it is by having my phone verified with the system. When the system unverifies it, the email gets deleted along with it, and so it's gone. It's gone. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that at some point I didn't forward it to somebody I shouldn't forward it to. I can tell you ethically, I have not done that. But you know, we've seen funny things happen from or with employees who depart a company. One of the things I once heard is somebody downloaded a bunch of source code. It was a company, a startup company, that had an idea for an app, and somebody was developing it as an employee, and they left, and they took the source code, and they thought, well, I'm the one who wrote it, so aren't I the one who own it? Well, the person's not a lawyer, but the answer is no. If you did it on behalf of an employer, the employer is the one who owns it, and they didn't have a right to take it. So if they had their work email and attached the code to the work email and then forwarded it outside of the system, that would be a little bit harder to stop. But there would at least be a track of it, because if we look at their work email, assuming we've kept control of it, we would see that the person forwarded an email to themselves. And this, by the way, used to be the most common way that departing employees would keep company information, is overnight they would email a whole bunch of stuff to themselves and then If you look at their email upon departure, you would see the night before a bunch of emails being sent to themselves. Most employees are smart enough now to know that that's a real easy way to catch them, and that's why we see things more often with either a flash drive, using some kind of cloud service to upload to a cloud and then delete that cloud account after it's been forwarded. They've gotten more sophisticated. That goes way beyond bring your own device, but it's what we see most common. I do want to touch on destruction of bring your own devices. When cell phones first became popular, I don't know if you remember this, but you would walk through malls and restaurants and you would see these silos, and it would say donate your old phones, and people would just, they would go to like needy families, mothers who couldn't afford phones and needed contact with their kids' schools and stuff, and so these were good causes, and they were legitimate causes, but people were taking these and dropping them in the silos, and they were dropping, like in my case, the mother lode of attorney-client information. Now again, my phone, modern day, is pretty secure, and probably somebody couldn't do anything with it, and at best they'd have to wipe the entire phone. Now, Microsoft, I know with, I don't think Microsoft has their own phone now. I know that Google, I know that iPhone, I'm not sure about which Droid manufacturers do it, but I just can't walk into a store or a service provider and say, here, wipe my phone. They won't do that. You've got to actually put in your password, and I don't know if anyone's ever done an upgrade where you trade in a phone and they ask you to actually log in and put in your password so they can do the factory reset. So I don't know if those silos work anymore, but the point is people will throw away devices without thinking about what's on those devices and how can people get to them. Perfect example, and how I first really became aware of this. We were moving about 5 years ago, and my wife called me and said, you've got about 3 computers downstairs. Are you using them anymore? And I said, no, that's why they're downstairs being in the basement. I said, no, I'm not using them, that's why they're there. Well, there's a school that just advertised that they're looking for used computers, and it was a school for underprivileged kids, and she said, I'd like to donate them. And I just went, stop. There's a hard drive in every one of those. That's a BYOD device. I was using those devices at home to get legal work done, and the reason they were sitting in my basement was because I wanted nobody to get a hold of those hard drives. So I said, let's do this. I'll come home, I'm going to pop out the hard drives. It took me 15 minutes to pop out the hard drives. And I brought them in to IT, but you could bring them presumably to Best Buy or any place that has service and say, I'm donating this, I want it wiped. I actually had my hard drives destroyed, so I didn't have to worry about them at all. And then for $50, $60 at Staples, you could buy a new hard drive, pop it in, and donate the computer. So you got to think about that. So don't donate devices without cleaning them. Think about documents and information you may want to retain before you get rid of a device. Most people do think about that, but when I say think about it, really go through, because you might forget that you downloaded a bunch of documents into a directory, and actually going through your directory may remind you of that. Go through your apps on your phone and think about what you may have saved on an app that may be connected to a cloud account, for example. Just think about that. And then think about where are the backups. Where are they? Who backed them up? An issue we've seen with cloud storage is when you terminate your cloud storage account, what happens to the information that was up there? Does it stay up there forever? And when we say up there, it's really in a data center somewhere, hopefully within the United States. But ask those questions. What's my computer connected to? My Surface, as an example, and even my iPhone with regard to the Office 365. Again, I never put work stuff in there, but it automatically updates to the cloud, to Office 365. So my personal photos are automatically being updated. My personal emails are being automatically updated up to the cloud. My work stuff is not. It's only being connected to my Office. But think about where that stuff is connected before you destroy your devices or get rid of them or give them to your kids. Think about that. So what are the takeaways that I have pending further questions?
I have a couple questions. What about using Dropbox to store documents instead of their computers? Any specific thoughts on that? Is that similar to general cloud storage?
I put it in the category of general cloud storage. I can tell you that me and experts in the industry generally don't like Dropbox for things that might be confidential. It's good for sharing family photos. I just got back from a vacation. I want to share my photos with members of my family. That's a good way to do that. Common documentation you want to exchange with somebody. Blank documentation you want to send someone to fill out, bring into the office is fine. But when it comes to things that might be confidential, healthcare information, financial information, bank account information, I know that there are experts out there that recommend against Dropbox just out of security concerns and ease to pass stuff around. My firm, when we exchange documents online, we use a program currently called Titanfile. And what it does is it encrypts the document, and then we send an email to a specific person with a specific login that gives them a unique link, and they get to, it's called a channel, that once open you can then exchange documents with them. And when they go in that way, then they have the ability to unencrypt on their end. So the thing goes up encrypted, comes down encrypted. And Dropbox doesn't necessarily have all those protocols. At the same time, I can tell you people would just by default send me stuff by Dropbox, and I'll say, let me set you up with a Titanfile link, for further documentation you may want to send me. Now again, sometimes it's really not confidential information. It just may be their advertising information, things like that. But if it's something really, really confidential, I'd prefer that they don't use it. But Dropbox is a valid way to do it. It does require a login. It does require a password. And so it is a valid way to exchange documents. And I do know that there is, what do they call it for business? They call it Dropbox for Business. You get business accounts. So I wouldn't be overly alarmed with Dropbox, especially with a smaller company. I would just think about, again, whether you might be sending something that is very, very confidential. That's the only time I'd take a pause on that. But I'm not going to give you a recommendation not to use Dropbox.
One question about social media. For market, if you're using social media for marketing and an employee manages the organization's social media accounts, would you recommend that the employee with this role have separate social media accounts, one for personal and one for work?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. There should be complete separation because when they leave, if they ever leave, you're going to want termination of maybe that account entirely, maybe just their access to the account. But it is just, again, safer to have a completely separate login. Because let's just say there's litigation, either personal or business side, and there's a request that goes to Facebook and we want all activity by this particular user, you're going to get a mixture of personal and business information. I can tell you that a problem that we have faced with not with clients, but clients have faced and called us about are employees who control the social media account, and sometimes employees are the ones who get your domain for your website, and they call up one of the website registrars, GoDaddy or whoever it is. They give their credit card, get reimbursed by the company, maybe use a company credit card, but they open the account in their name, and they act as if they're the ones who own the account. And there's a distinction between the intellectual property of the account versus the actual existence of the account. Or they may say, I'm actually the one who owns the Facebook page, and they take down the Facebook page, or something along those lines. And so you should not have a single employee, unless you're a single employee company. You should not have a single employee being the one who moderates a web page. There should always be multiple people who have the right to moderate a web page. And that way, if somebody disappears, goes away, is terminated, then you maintain some control over that website for the other moderators to then be able to terminate their access, maybe delete things that shouldn't have been put up in the last minute, like I'm leaving this company because it sucks. You don't want it there. So it's a way of keeping some control.
And this is for any social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. There should be multiple access, and again, different from personal. Mm-hmm. So are there any other pending questions at the moment?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I was just going to list some takeaways. BYOD is definitely convenience. It definitely adds efficiency. It is definitely with us. It's going to stay with us. It comes with some things to think about, which is security, control of company information, and be smart. Be smart. And when I should have added to that, be smart and educate your people. And education has to be often. Data security, I once said this thinking I was unique, and I've now been to about 3 or 4 data security seminars that have used the identical line, and I'm pretty sure they didn't take it from me. It's just obvious. Data security violations or breaches is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So the more people are reminded about it, the better your policies are, the better people are reminded about the policies, the more smart you are, the more you educate, the better you are. And then the last thing is, if needed, talk to your PA attorney to determine if you need a BYOD policy and what should be included in that policy. A lot of what we talked about today. But the highest level thing is maintaining control and security.
I have some questions here. If someone uses their personal account for business, do business confidentiality agreements and technology guidelines of the organization cover their use of those personal accounts? And do you have to have a specific policy in place to cover that?
The answer is actually it depends. At least from a trade secret angle, which is your strictest level of confidentiality. There's a statute that applies, and the statute, and I think I mentioned this before, says you have to take steps that are reasonable under the circumstances to protect the confidentiality of the information or the secrecy of the information. If you end up in litigation, or a question is always going to be asked, what steps did you take to protect confidentiality? And that is, requiring passwords, limited access to the documents, maybe locking the documents, a policy that prevents taking the documents. Having said that, in a small company, so there's no definitive answer here, it really depends on the circumstances, but in a small company where everybody is going to have access to confidential information, you've got a policy that says it's confidential, it's marked confidential. If on their own they save it on a personal device, but for business purposes, that arguably does not waive confidentiality. But if they're now saving it to a personal cloud account, there's really no reason for that if the company has its own cloud account. So I'm distinguishing between, I have an iPad and I'm going to be going to the airport and I want this document on my iPad. I can put it on the iPad to work on the document and arguably not waive the confidentiality, because there's a reason I'm doing that. I am one of the people who's allowed to see it. It's marked confidential. I, again, can't get to the document in the first instance, without having access to the company's document system. Maybe I'm the creator of the document, and I created it on my laptop, and it's confidential from the moment of creation. So just the mere storage there on something personal may not necessarily waive it. I could tell you that we had an incident once where our email system went down thanks to a fiber line being cut for like 4 days. We had no option but to tell clients, we're going to have to communicate with you through a personal account, but please do not send us documents to that account. Please don't do this, that, and the other. And then as soon as everything was fixed with AT&T, then we cleaned all that out to make sure nothing was left behind. But mostly what we used our personal email for was to tell people there's a reason I am not sending you emails, there's a reason I'm not communicating with you. If you need any attention, please pick up the phone and call me. Because we really didn't want the stuff out there. But there are times where it just becomes a necessity. But I'll go back to the advice, to try not to mix it. As I said, the danger is usually more the other way around. If you have personal communications you put on your business email, the business actually owns them because it's their email system. If it's the other way around, you may be waiving confidentiality, but again, depending on the circumstances.
And one final question, do you have any thoughts or concerns about what if someone tags an organization's social media through their own personal social media?
I'm not sure I understand the question. They tag them.
I guess if it's an employee who through their personal account, they.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think that's okay. I'll use just myself as an example. Not that I've done this, but there's nothing wrong with my going to my Facebook page or my LinkedIn page and going, I like Morse, Manning and Martin. They're a great law firm. That's okay. So I don't think that's any problem, and employees should be proud of their companies, and especially if you're working for charitable purposes, you maybe want to be publicizing that as much as you can. So I don't have a problem with that.
Right. And that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Well, I hope people learned something, and I wish I could see your faces so I could see the reaction.
Oh, wait, we have one last question.
Okay.
What if the tag is disparaging to the organization?
That really gets into a whole new can of worms because this happens all the time. Social media lends itself to disparaging comments, and if you see a disparaging comment, for example, on Yelp or Travelocity, they're normally not going to do anything about it. People are allowed to make comments. In this context that you're raising, which is one of my employees, I think you got an internal employee issue. Mm-hmm. If an employee says, I really can't believe I work for this company because there are X, Y, and Z, very disparaging comments, I would think that the company probably wants to get rid of that employee very quick. Mm-hmm. But is the employee allowed to say that? Sure. There's still generally it's not a First Amendment issue because the First Amendment only applies to the government. But it's still, they're allowed to say what they want to say as long as it doesn't break the law on their own web account. And we do see this with former employees. So you'll see comments on, what's that website, Glassdoor, where people can, review companies. There was a website, I won't say the full name out loud, but it was back when the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s. There was a website created called fcompany.com. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't what you would think it is. What it was is a place for people who had lost their jobs to talk about the companies that they work for that imploded, and their leaders and their investors, and just really ripped them. And it's just really not a lot you could do as long as they weren't revealing confidential information. They weren't crossing the line of what we would call defamation, which would be like accusing somebody of a crime they didn't occur, something that dramatic. But we do see former employees who will make comments on their social media about their former employers, or not necessarily on their web page or their Facebook page, but like on a Glassdoor where you can review somebody. What I always tell people is when you read review sites, read it with a grain of salt. If you ever go to a restaurant in Travelocity and it says 500 reviews, 499 are positive, I'm going to go, That can't happen. Nobody's that good. Normally, you're going to see, maybe mostly positives, but you're always going to see the 1 or 2 stars, that come along with it. I guess get back to the question: what happens if an employee tags their employer and their webpage and says something disparaging? I think you just have an internal employee issue, and it may be as simple as, hey, we didn't know you had a problem. Mm-hmm. I'll remove that post if we can deal with it. And it may be, we can't stand for that. Mm-hmm. So can we now have all your devices so we can make sure that they're all clean of our information, and have a nice day.
All right, that's all the questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.